Welcome to RPG PhD, where we break down the art and science of tabletop role-playing games. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're diving into the psychology of dice, how rolling mechanics shape player experience, from suspenseful advantage rolls in D&D to the calculated chaos of dice pools in Shadowrun. Why do we love rolling dice? How does randomness impact fairness, tension, and player agency? And if you're designing your own RPG, how do you choose the right dice system? So stick around as we roll into the fascinating world of probability and player perception. Tabletop role-playing games and dice go hand in hand. The clatter of dice across a table isn't just background noise, it's the sound of suspense, hope, and sometimes despair. We've all felt that flutter of excitement when about to roll for a critical save or a daring attack. In that moment, anything can happen. Dice inject unpredictability into the story, ensuring that neither players nor the game master have complete control over outcomes. This randomness is not a flaw of RPGs, it's a feature that keeps the game exciting and genuine. In fact, dice and the randomness they bring are essential to the tabletop experience. Past attempts at diceless RPGs haven't really caught on for a reason. There's a psychological allure to letting fate or physics decide outcomes, and it profoundly shapes player experience. Not all dice systems are created equal. Different games use different types of dice and mechanics, from the swingy single D20 of Dungeons & Dragons to percentile pairs in Call of Cthulhu or fistfuls of D6s in Shadowrun. These mechanics feel different to the players and can even change how we perceive probability and fairness. Randomness is one of the secret sauces that make RPG sessions memorable. Why do we love leaving things to chance? For one, a random outcome is an impartial arbiter. The dice have no agenda. They won't go easy on you because you're the hero, but they also won't deliberately target you because the GM is feeling mean. In a way, that makes the game feel fair. Everyone is subject to the same swings of fortune. Many players take comfort in the mantra that the dice never lie, trusting that a fair roll means the result, good or bad, is justified. This impartiality can reduce the sense that the GM is picking on someone. Blame the dice gods instead. Of course, perceived fairness can differ from true mathematical fairness, but more on that later. Random outcomes also create tension and drama. Think of a combat encounter or a tricky lock-picking attempt. If success were guaranteed, it would be mundane. If failure were certain, it would be hopeless. But when there's a chance of either, every roll becomes an adrenaline-charged moment. The whole table might hold its breath as the dice tumbles, then erupt in cheers or groans at the result. This emotional roller coaster is a big part of what makes RPGs engaging. As game design commentators note, players tend to find the sweet spot of chance between about 30% and 90% success probability. The most interesting. That's where they're willing to take risks and feel the rush. Too close to 100% and it's boring. Too close to 0% and it feels futile. But in that middle range, uncertainty rules, and with it comes excitement. Research often suggests a more narrow, optimal range to maintain player engagement. For instance, some studies indicate that a success rate between 60 and 80% is ideal. Probabilities lower than 60% may make a game feel too challenging, while those exceeding 80% might render it too easy. Additionally, insights from the gambling industry reveal that players often perceive a 60 to 80% success rate as even odds, which aligns with their expectations for fair and engaging gameplay. Randomness even contributes to player agency, paradoxical as that may sound. Players often choose to roll rather than have an automatic outcome because rolling gives a sense of involvement. Deciding to attempt something risky is a meaningful choice. You're saying, I'll take my chances. And when you physically roll the dice yourself, that tactile action reinforces the feeling that you, not the character sheet, not the GM, are doing something to influence events. We'll later see that who rolls the dice can psychologically matter a lot. In short, randomness, when well balanced, makes a game feel fair, keeps everyone on their toes, and empowers players to dare mighty things. Before we get too abstract though, let's break down some common dice mechanics and see how each shapes the player's experience of that randomness. Different systems have different flavors of chance. each with its own psychological footprint. Not all dice rolls are equal. Rolling a single 20-sided die produces a flat 5% chance per face, a linear probability where every number is as likely as any other. But roll 2 dice and add them, like 2d6 or 3d6, and you get a bell curve distribution. Results gravitate toward the average, and extremes are rarer. Roll a bunch of dice and count successes, and you get something else again. Game designers have experimented with all of these methods over the years. Classic D&D uses D20s, flat odds. Call of Cthulhu uses percentile D100 for fine granularity. Grups uses 3d6 for a bell curve. Shadowrun uses handful of dice d6 pools for a more normalized spread, and on and on. Each approach affects how outcomes are distributed and how players think about their chances. So let's look at a few prominent examples. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition uses a simple yet brilliant mechanic called advantage and disadvantage. Instead of fiddling with numerical modifiers, having advantage means you roll 2 d20s and you take the higher result. Disadvantage means you roll 2 and take the lower. Mechanically, this shifts the probability curve significantly. For example, normally on a d20 you have a 30% chance to roll 15 or above. With advantage, that chance jumps to about 51%, and with disadvantage it plummets to under 9%. In essence, advantage makes high rolls much more likely and low rolls much less likely, while disadvantage does the opposite. The genius is that players feel this benefit or penalty in a very tangible way. Rolling twice adds suspense. You might get one bad roll and one good roll, and you're anxiously hoping the good one counts. With advantage, it's often a relief. Whew, I rolled a 5 on one die, but the other came up 18. Thank goodness for advantage. With disadvantage, it's pure tension. I need this jump to succeed. First die is a 17. Please let the second be it's a 3. I have to take the 3. Players often describe advantage as making them more confident and willing to attempt heroic feats, since they know a single flub die might be saved by the second roll. Disadvantage, conversely, fills them with dread. Even a normally easy task isn't so sure when the worst of 2 rolls might wreck it. Another psychological perk is simplicity. It's easy to roll twice, pick the best or worst, without calculating exact odds. Players intuitively understand that advantage is good, even if they don't know the precise percentages. They know it feels like about +5 bonus or so. This simplicity means less time calculating and more time experiencing the suspense of the roll. It's also more viscerally satisfying than a static bonus. Picking up 2 dice feels like a little extra power. In fact, advantage is so beloved that many players will grant it for creative roleplay or clever ideas, essentially as a fun encouragement. Of course, advantage can also swing outcomes dramatically. It doubles the chance of critical hits, for instance, since you get 2 shots at that 20. But interestingly, because both dice are seen, players might perceive it as less swingy or more fair. You got to try twice. So if it still failed, fate really meant it. All in all, advantage or disadvantage manages to boost or curb success chances while heightening emotional engagement with each roll. It turns a single uncertain outcome into a mini-drama of its own, which most players find exciting rather than nerve-wracking. On the opposite end of the spectrum of complexity, we have percentile systems, epitomized by games like Call of Cthulhu or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. In a percentile system, your character's skill is rated 1 to 100, and to determine success, you roll a pair of 10-sided dice, D100, to generate a number from 1 to 100. If the result is equal to or under your skill, you succeed. It's elegantly simple. A 67% skill means a 67% chance of success. Players immediately understand their odds because they're looking at a percentage. This transparency can be comforting. There's no need to convert or guess at what a +3 on a d20 means. 75% is 75%. The Call of Cthulhu RPG thrives on this system. If your investigate skill is 50, you know you have a coin flip chance to decipher that ancient tome. This clarity can influence player decisions. You might think twice about attempting something if you only have a 20% skill, knowing exactly how slim that chance is. Conversely, a high skill gives a reassuring sense of competence because you can quantify your reliability. In terms of player psychology, percentile dice often feel fair and consistent. There's less of the cognitive disconnect that sometimes happens in other systems. Why did my master thief fail a simple lockpick roll? If the thief had a 90% pickpocket skill and still failed, well, the player knew there was that 10% chance of flubbing it. It hurts, but it's not a surprise. One thing to note, in percentile systems, low rolls are good. You want under your skill. This is just an aesthetic difference. D&D players are used to high equals good, but it can have a subtle psychological effect. Some players love that rolling a 0-1 is the best outcome. It feels special, almost like you beat the dice by rolling as low as possible, while rolling 100 is the kind of worst catastrophe. It flips our usual instinct where higher number equals better, which can actually reinforce the sense that the game is about tempting fate. You're always trying to stay below the radar of the dice gods, which is fitting for a horror game like Call of Cthulhu. Overall, percentile systems shine in transparency and granularity. Every single skill point in a skill matters, and you feel those improvements. Going from 50% to 70% skill tangibly raises your confidence and success. The cost is that you lose the bell curve moderation of multi-dice systems. A D100 is as swingy as a D20 in terms of distribution, flat odds for any value. So a veteran detective with 90% skill can still fail 1 time in 10, which might frustrate some players if it happens at a crucial moment. But because the system telegraphs that chance so clearly, most players accept it as the price of doing business with Lady Luck. And when that unlikely failure or success occurs, it's a big wow moment, often accompanied by nervous laughter or screams. Clarity in probability helps players feel informed, which is its own kind of comfort, even when the dice are cruel. Now let's talk about dice pools. Used in games like Shadowrun, lots of D6s, or World of Darkness, D10s, or Blades in the Dark, which also use D6s. A dice pool means you roll several dice at once, usually counting each die that meets a certain threshold as a success. For example, in Shadowrun, you might roll 8d6 and count how many dice come up 5 or 6 as hits. The more hits, the better you do. In World of Darkness, you roll a number of d10s equal to your skill plus your stat and count how many are above, say, 6 or 7. The basic idea is that a more skilled or advantaged character rolls more dice, increasing the likelihood of getting enough successes to succeed. From a probability standpoint, dice pools create a binomial distribution. There's still randomness, but results tend to cluster around an average number of successes. With a large pool, you're unlikely to get 0 successes, a total failure, because odds are some dice will succeed. Conversely, with a small pool, getting many successes is unlikely. This often makes outcomes feel more consistent with character skill. If your cyber hacker normally rolls 12 dice, you expect them to perform well most of the time, and indeed they probably will. But there's always that slim chance of an unlucky roll where most of the dice come up short. On the flip side, a newbie rolling just 2 dice might usually fail, but once in a while they'll surprise everyone with a double success. So dice pools give a nice sense of scaling competence while still allowing dramatic outliers. The psychological effect of rolling a fistful of dice is huge. Many players absolutely love rolling handfuls of dice. It's tactile, noisy, and viscerally satisfying in a way that a single die roll isn't. There's even a bit of dice goblin joy in collecting and hoarding many dice for your pool. Rolling more dice often just seems more fun. We can think about it as our lizard brains enjoy the sensory experience of multiple dice. Each die tumbling is like a mini roll in itself, and watching a whole batch spill out across the table is thrilling. It can turn a simple yes-no outcome into a moment of flurried counting. Okay, I got a 6, a 5, that's 2 successes, and the rest are misses. Is that enough? Dice pools also introduce interesting nuances in perception of probability. Because calculating the exact odds of, say, 5 or more successes on 10 dice is not trivial to do on the fly, players often rely on gut feeling and experience to judge their chances. They might say, I feel pretty good about rolling 8 dice. I'll probably get at least 2 successes. Generally, more dice equal better odds, which is easy to grasp. But the randomness can surprise you. Sometimes you roll a bucket of dice and nearly all are failures. These moments really stand out because they feel against the odds, and they are. Players often interpret such events dramatically. I can't believe none of my 10 dice succeeded. My character must be cursed. This can feed into the fun superstition of the table. Dice shaming anyone? On the other side, rolling an improbably high number of successes feels like a heroic triumph or sheer luck. In both cases, the dice pool system ensures that extreme bad or good luck, when it happens, is memorable precisely because it's a bit unusual. Most of the time, results will be middle of the road, which can actually reinforce players' confidence in their character's reliable abilities. One potential downside, handling large dice pools can be slower, counting successes and sometimes re-rolling if the system has mechanics like exploding dice or re-rolls on certain values. But many players don't mind because the process itself is enjoyable. It's worth noting that some older World of Darkness editions had a quirky rule where rolling a 1 could cancel out a success, and if you rolled no successes and any ones, it was a botch, a critical failure. This led to odd situations where more dice could mathematically increase the chance of a critical failure, simply because you had more chances to roll a 1 with no successes among them. Players definitely noticed that weirdness. It felt very unfair for a master level character to botch more often than a novice. Most modern dice pool games have streamlined those kinks out. World of Darkness latest editions remove the canceling ones, for example. The lesson there is that players expect consistency. If you roll more dice, you should generally be better off, and if the stats on your sheet are high, you shouldn't catastrophically fail too frequently. When the mechanics align with those expectations, dice pools tend to feel good and rewarding of skill. Blades in the Dark adds an extra layer to the dice pool concept by incorporating position and effect into the mechanic. Blade still uses a pool of d6s for actions, typically 1 to 4 dice plus possible bonuses, but the outcome reading is unique. You look at the single highest die rolled. A 6 is a full success, a 4 to 5 is a success with a complication or partial success, and a 1 to 3 is a failure, often with a bad consequence. Multiple 6s mean a critical success. What's interesting is that the chance of at least a 4 to 5 or a 6 scales with dice pool size. With 1 die, there's a 50% chance of failure, 1 to 3. With 2 dice, only a 25% chance all dice are 1 to 3. With 3 dice, it's about 12.5%, and so on. So more dice drastically reduce the chance of a total failure, increasing reliability of getting at least a partial success. Now, position, controlled, risky, and desperate in Blades determines how bad the consequences of failure or partial successes are, and effect, limited, standard, and great determines how much you achieve when you do succeed. These are chosen by the player's approach and the fiction before rolling. The brilliant thing here is how it affects player psychology. Players themselves decide how much risk to take on. If they choose a desperate position for potentially great effect, they know they're courting disaster if the roll goes poorly. But the reward could be higher. A controlled position is safer, failure isn't too punishing, but you might only have limited effect, so you might need multiple attempts to accomplish the goal. This explicit trade-off gives players a sense of control over the randomness and its stakes. You're not just tossing dice and hoping, you're managing risk, which is a very real-world psychological process. When it comes to the roll itself, the dice pool resolution in Blades is very forgiving compared to single dice systems. As mentioned, with even 2 dice, the odds are in favor of at least a mixed success. Total failures become relatively rare if you can stack dice. However, because Blades is built on the idea that mixed results, success at a cost, are common, players don't see a 4 to 5 result as a failure. It's usually a you do it but outcome. This ensures that the story keeps moving. You rarely hit a dead end just because of the dice. Psychologically, this can alleviate the frustration that pure failure can bring. Instead of, I failed, nothing happens, it's often, okay, I succeeded, but there's a complication. Maybe I dropped my lockpick in the process or alerted a guard. Now we have a new problem to deal with. This turns a negative into a narrative twist, which players often find more fair and fun. The dice are seen as contributing to the story, not just shutting them down. The positions also incentivize embracing risk. A desperate roll in Blades grants you experience points regardless of the outcome because your character is learning from the desperation. So even failure has a silver lining. Knowing this can make players less fearful of bad rolls, which is a fascinating psychological tweak. By rewarding the act of risking, the game reframes failure as progress, not just as a setback. Blades in the Dark system combines a small dice pool with its increasing reliability as you add dice, with player-driven risk calibration, position effect, and graded outcomes. This results in a very engaged player experience. You feel agency in how you approach tasks. The dice resolution is tense but not usually catastrophic, and even when things go wrong, it often feels like part of the narrative rather than pure punishment. It's a great example of using mechanics to guide player emotions, keeping tension high, desperate rolls are scary, while mitigating the potential bitterness of failure through partial successes and rewards for trying. Roll a die enough times and you'll see all sorts of outcomes. That's just probability. But as human beings, we're not always great at processing randomness rationally. In the heat of a game, our brains are busy making stories and patterns out of die rolls. This leads to some classic psychological quirks at the gaming table. Let's explore a couple of big ones: the gambler's fallacy and the illusion of control, plus a dash of general superstition and bias. One notorious cognitive bias is the gambler's fallacy, the belief that past random events affect future ones. I've rolled low 3 times in a row, so I'm due for a high roll now. In reality, each die roll is independent. The die has no memory. But try telling that to someone clutching their misbehaving D20. Players routinely succumb to this fallacy in amusing ways, like a practice where a player might prime a die by rolling out all the bad rolls ahead of time. For instance, one table describes a gamer who pre-rolls his dice. He sets aside the dice that have rolled 2 ones in a row, believing that the chance of a third consecutive one on that same die is astronomically low. By his logic, that die has gotten its bad luck out of the way, so now it's safe to use on an important roll, since the odds of a die rolling 3 ones in a row is 1 in 8,000. Of course, this is pure gambler's fallacy. Each roll is still 1 in 20 odds of a 1, regardless of what came before. But when you're staring at a critical roll, who wouldn't want to believe they could tilt fate in their favor? It's a harmless ritual that gives the player a feeling of control, and a fun story to tell. This brings us to the illusion of control, our tendency to overestimate our ability to influence random events. In casinos, people throw dice harder, hoping for high numbers, or softer for low numbers, as if their technique will change the outcome. RPG players have their own charming versions of this. It's been observed, for example, that players will roll a die gently when they want a low result, like trying to roll under a number, and vigorously when they want a high result. We also see players perform all sorts of superstitious rituals: blowing on dice, tapping them 3 times, using a special dice tray, rolling a practice throw first. Nearly every gaming group has the concept of dice jail, where a particular die yields too many bad results. The player pointedly banishes it to a corner of the table or a box, punishing it for its treachery. They might even switch to a new die. That blue D20 is cold tonight, I'm switching to the red one. All of this is logically silly. A die doesn't have moods, but it feels real in the moment. As one gamer joked, every player has that one set of dice that hates us and gleefully loves to mess with us. Need a high roll? Nope. Ones forever. We love those die as much as we hate them, as if we can will them into submission by persuasion or intimidation. This tongue-in-cheek comment perfectly captures how we personify dice and imagine we have a relationship with them. We know it's inanimate, yet we can address it. Come on, don't fail me now! The dice become almost like NPCs in our game, fickle little spirits that we try to cajole. Another aspect of the illusion of control is who gets to roll. In some games, the GM might roll for the player's saves or perception checks behind the screen. Many players loathe that. They feel much better when they roll for their character, even if the odds are identical. Why? Because physically rolling the dice provides an illusion that they're influencing the outcome. If the GM rolls and announces, "Sorry, you failed," a player might feel somewhat passive or even suspect about some fudging. But if the player rolls and sees the result, they're participating in that moment of chance. As researchers have noticed, rolling dice makes the player believe they are contributing to the outcome beyond just declaring their action. It's one of the only ways to tangibly interact with the mechanics of the world, so relinquishing that can feel like a loss of agency. Game designers often take this into account. Many modern games maximize players rolling for themselves to keep them engaged and feeling in control, or at least responsible for their fate. We also have to mention confirmation bias and selective memory. Players tend to remember the extreme moments, the critical hits and critical fails, far more vividly than the many middling results. This can skew our perception of how the dice treat us. A player might moan, "I always roll terribly when it matters." It's likely not true overall, but it feels true because that one time you botched a crucial roll in the boss fight is burned into your memory, whereas the 5 solid hits you landed early in the dungeon are just a blur. Likewise, someone might think a particular die is lucky because the first time they used it, they rolled 2 20s. Now, every time they use that die, they're a bit more optimistic, and if it rolls well, it reinforces the legend. If it rolls badly, well, maybe they'll give it a pass because it was just an off day. We humans are great at finding patterns even when none exist, especially when it comes to random events. In gaming, this manifests as the fun folklore and personal superstitions about dice. There's also the hot hand fallacy, the idea that successes can come in streaks, or failure in streaks. In an RPG context, if you've rolled 3 successes in a row, you might feel invincible. I'm hot tonight, and take bigger risks, assuming your luck will hold. Sometimes this leads to overextending. The dice don't actually know you were hot and a crash might be coming, but in the moment, the confidence is real, and that can actually affect gameplay decisions. Conversely, a string of failures can demoralize players. I shouldn't even bother trying. My dice are cold. A good GM or supportive group will usually intervene at that point, either by offering an in-game boost, here, have a bonus die, you look like you need it, or by encouraging the player not to give up. We've all had nights where it seems like the universe just says nope to everything we roll. It's frustrating, and it can feel profoundly unfair, even though we rationally know randomness can produce clusters. Players will often swap dice or take a break to change their luck. It's all psychological solace, aiming to break the perceived jinx. One fascinating thing is how emotions run high with random streaks. Research in game design has found that players tend to remember and emphasize negative streaks more than positive ones. You might hit with 90% accuracy all session long, but the one time it fails at a clutch moment, that's the story you will tell later. We should have had it, but I rolled a natural 1. Game developers, even in video games, have recognized this and just sometimes adjust randomness under the hood to avoid many misses in a row because it feels bad. In tabletop, the GM might do this by discretion, perhaps subtly fudging a roll or introducing a narrative success after many failures to keep things fun. But players themselves also cope by reframing the story. The gods of luck demand a sacrifice, or by doubling down with things like, I'll use my once per session lucky reroll now. Ultimately, these psychological biases and behaviors are not problems as long as everyone's having fun. They're part of the culture and the charm of dice-based games. The key is awareness. Understanding you're under the sway of gambler's fallacy or confirmation bias can help temper any real frustration and keep it in the realm of lighthearted superstition. Most gamers embrace the quirks. They'll laugh about how the dice have it in for them this week, then show up next session with a fresh attitude, and maybe new dice. For game designers and GMs, being aware of these mind games suggests a few things. Providing outlets for players to feel in control, like letting them roll or offering reroll mechanics, can improve their emotional experience. Also, recognizing when probability might lead to unfun situations, like a run of bad luck completely derailing the story, allows you to have safety nets or mitigations in place. In the end, rolling dice is as much a psychological drama as it is a mathematical one, and that's a big part of why we love it. Dice mechanics aren't just about mathematics, they're about feelings. As we've seen, the way a game handles randomness can greatly affect player experience. For game designers, it's crucial to choose mechanics that serve the kind of experience you want to create. To wrap up, here are some key considerations for designing or selecting a dice mechanic that takes pacing, transparency, tension, and player psychology into account. Pacing and speed. Consider how fast and smooth you want your game to flow. A single dice system like D20 or percentile offers quick resolutions. One roll and you're done, keeping the pace brisk. Dice pools can slow things slightly with counting, but they add a lot of flavor in the process. If your game has many rolls, which means something that's very combat heavy, something straightforward like advantage, disadvantage, or simple target numbers can prevent bogging you down. On the other hand, if you want to slow down and savor big moments, a dramatic multi-dice draw, like pulling dice out for a pool or rolling sequentially, can be a feature, not a bug. Multiple rolls for one outcome, like best of 3 or a step-by-step challenge, can build tension, but use them sparingly or for climactic scenes, since they take more time. Transparency versus opaqueness. How much do you want players to know about their odds? Transparent systems, percentiles, or any mechanic where probabilities are easy to intuit, empower analytical players to make informed choices and tend to feel fair. They also reduce rule lookup. A player with 70% skill knows what that means immediately. Opaque systems like complex dice pools or funky custom dice with symbols can create a sense of mystery or prevent metagaming the odds, but might leave players guessing. If your game is about intuition and fate, a bit of opacity might be fine. Players go with their gut. But if strategy and informed decisions are core, lean towards clarity. An example middle ground is providing probability charts or guidelines in the rules. Rolling 3d6, 16 plus is about 10% chance, so players aren't in the dark. Remember, players' perception of fairness is improved when they understand what the chances were supposed to be. Surprises are great in story, but not as great as the fundamental math, unless that's an intentional part of the fun. Tension and drama. Decide what kind of tension curve you want. A swingy system, d20, coin flips, etc., produces spikes of tension on every roll. High risk, high reward. This can be perfect for high adventure or comedic games where failure is as entertaining as success. A bell curve or dice pool yields more consistent outcomes, which might be better for a game emphasizing competence and realism. Fewer unbelievable flukes. That leads to a smoother tension build, with occasional bursts when things go really well or badly. Also consider critical success and failure mechanics. These add excitement. Everyone loves a good critical hit story, but too frequent crit fails can frustrate. Make sure the frequency of extreme events matches your game's tone. In a slapstick game, frequent crit fails are hilarious. In a serious game, they should be rarer to maintain gravitas. Additionally, think about fail-forward design, like Blade's partial successes, if you want to keep tension without total derailment. They let you have the cake, uncertainty, and eat it forward momentum too. Player agency and tools. Incorporate ways for players to influence luck. This could be as simple as giving advantage for smart play, as DMs often do in D&D 5e, or as formal as a resource system, reroll tokens, adding an extra die, flipping a destiny coin. By letting players have a say in the randomness, you mitigate the helpless feeling that prolonged bad luck can cause. It also creates additional strategic layers. Players must decide when to spend their juju for maximum effect. Ensure these mechanics are intuitive and accessible. Players should remember they have these options. For example, Call of Cthulhu introduced pushing. A roll, if you fail, you can choose to try again, but with greater consequences on a second failure. This kind of risk-taking decision is great for agency. You choose to gamble further. Whatever you use, calibrate it so that it doesn't eliminate risk entirely. Just give players a clutch handbrake. Feeling in control of an out-of-control situation is empowering and fun. And psychological safety nets. Be mindful of the emotional impact of randomness. If your game's success chances are often low, consider ways to keep players from getting demoralized. This might be a built-in pity rule. If you fail 3 times in a row, the third failure is converted to a partial success. Not common, but some solo board games do this to prevent death spirals, or simply guidance in the GM section about balancing encounters and difficulties to avoid long, unfun failure streaks. Conversely, if failure is meant to be a big part of the game's theme, a horror game where characters are supposed to eventually fail or go mad, then ensure the players know that and have alternate ways to feel accomplishment, like discovering clues even as they spiral downward. Setting the right expectation helps. If the player knows it's a greedy game where the dice will screw them and that's the point, they're more likely to treat it as a challenge or a story feature rather than feel personally robbed. Thematic fit. Lastly, choose a dice mechanism that fits your game's theme and narrative style. Percentile dice give a sort of old-school simulationist vibe, great for games trying to feel like rigorous investigations or tactical simulations. Dice pools often feel cinematic. Throwing a bunch of dice and counting successes can emulate a montage of efforts, and the diminishing chance of total failure suits heroic tales where protagonists usually scrape by. A single die with advantage-disadvantage is elegant and a bit swingy, fitting a heroic fantasy like D&D, where fate plays a big role. And if you want a truly distinct feel, you can use custom dice like Fate's Fudge dice with plus-minus, or Fantasy Flight's Star Wars narrative dice with symbols. These can encode story twists directly, though they require players to learn new iconography. Whatever you pick, make sure it enhances the fantasy. For example, Blades in the Dark system reinforces its heist crew theme by making players weigh risk, position, and reward effect. It makes them feel like daring scoundrels taking chances. A well-chosen dice system will fade into the background of the experience, only surfacing to deliver those thrills and chills, and otherwise just supporting the kind of stories you want to tell. The psychology of dice in RPGs boils down to this. Randomness done right makes a game come alive. It keeps players at the edge of their seats, fist pumping when Lady Luck smiles, and laughing or face palming when she spits in their eye. By understanding how different mechanics influence player perceptions, or how giving players agency over risk can turn anxiety into confidence, designers and GMs can harness the power of chance to create truly memorable adventures. After all, those epic tales we reminisce about for years, remember when I rolled that one and banished the demon in one shot, or we were down to our last breath and then bam, crit success, are born at the crossroads of clever play and lucky or unlucky rolls. Embrace the dice, respect the psychology behind them, and your game will have the best of both worlds. Solid design and that ineffable magic, that uncertainty that keeps players coming back for more. So the next time you roll a critical hit or curse your cursed D20, remember, it's not just luck, it's psychology at play. Whether you're a game master looking to refine your mechanics or a player trying to outwit fate, understanding the psychology of dice can take your game to the next level. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe to RPG PhD for more content and design insights, and ring the bell so that you never miss an episode. Thoughts on your favorite dice mechanics? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.